and welcome to another episode of All Things Conflict. And today my guest is James Ellis, who is a coach and a coach trainer. And his job is to get the best out of people and the teams that they work in. And what's interesting about having somebody like James on the show is now we get a perspective from somebody who's not in the workplace themselves, but who sits on the edge of it, observing and reflecting and helping people become the best they can be. James, hi. How wonderful to have you as a guest on this podcast. We met several years ago in an education context, I think. That was how we kind of came together, and we sort of stayed in touch. Maybe it would be really helpful if you would start by telling the listeners a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, of course. Delightful to be here, Maria, talking with you today. So my name's James Ellis. I'm a full-time coach and coach trainer, and I work with two main types of organizations. So as you say, we met in the education context. I still work with schools, and what I do with schools is I coach teachers and school leaders, and then I train teachers and consult with schools to help them develop coaching cultures in order to develop and get the best out of their staff and their students. And then I also do that in a very different sphere with private equity companies. And I help them create cultures where, well, first of all, I do a lot of one-to-one coaching to help people develop, but also help people, more kind of senior people, develop their ability to be coach-like in their leadership and management to get the best out of their teams.
How amazing. Yes. And I have heard really wonderful things about your work, and I love collaborating with you whenever it's the need arises. I guess, whether it's private equity, whether it's education, or, even just a factory making nuts and bolts, at the end of the day, people are gathered and it's a workplace. So I'm really interested in your insights into this, idea of taking a coaching approach to a workplace and how we communicate with each other, how we navigate the systems and processes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things to start with is that a simple principle is that the quality of our interactions, the higher quality our inputs, the higher quality our outputs are likely to be. And coaching is one modality to improve the quality of our inputs. And I think a place where I would start around a lesson that we can take from coaching, and particularly that I see as somebody who works as kind of sort of just outside, as a consultant, adjunct, not inside power and organizational structures, but outside of them, is a really important coaching tool or concept that is sometimes called contracting, sometimes called designing, sometimes called creating partnership agreements. And in the simplest terms, that is upfront having meaningful conversations about the way that you are going to interact with each other. And that takes a number of forms. That can be very kind of principle value-based, and it can also be quite pragmatic and practical. To use your, borrow the factory phrase, nuts and bolts. It can be, what do we do when this happens? And I think one lesson that I would learn, or that I see a lot, is that conflict can arise when you have not dealt with predictable things up front. So, for example, it's highly likely that at some point somebody is going to let you down, or somebody's not going to. That a piece of work they deliver isn't going to be as good as you would like it to be. A piece of work you deliver isn't going to be as good as you would like it to be for somebody else. And there is an awkwardness around how you're going to deal with that when it arises. And it makes perfect sense from my perspective that you would discuss what you're going to do in that context before it arises. So let's say, I'm let's take one example of a field I work in, private equity. So a big thing that people have to do in private equity is they have to write investment papers, which is basically an analysis of a company that people are going to want to invest in. And that investment paper is really key for the decision-making process of whether they're going to invest some money in the company. And they need to be done to a certain standard on all kinds of metrics. And the chances are, as you come up, in particularly as you are more junior in a company and you have less experience, that you're going to make some mistakes and you might deliver at times a product that isn't what people who are more senior to you want. And um, and then there's a surprise when that has to be dealt with. And the surprise goes two ways. First of all, people are not prepared to hear it. Actually, this wasn't good enough, because often maybe they've never had that experience, particularly if they're a really high performer through their lives. They've maybe never had that experience before. And then secondly, people are both unwilling and maybe even unable to have the difficult or to give the feedback or to tell the person this wasn't done well enough. So an antidote to that would be to go, let's say I get a new person joining my team, a little bit junior to me, and they're going to submit pieces of work to me for review. I might say to them up front, whilst I hired you because I think you're great and you have the potential to be really great, I also acknowledge that all human beings make mistakes and our performance is in flux and develops over time. So there are going to be times I'm going to have to tell you when something's not good enough. And the way that I think that this is how I like to give it. How would you like me to give it? What is the way that I can give it to you so that you are able to hear it and act on it in a way that means that your performance is going to improve? Because I would love for all of those moments and conversations to be places of to be constructive rather than destructive. So that would be an example of one way that you could use a principle of design or contracting up front around a highly predictable thing in order to prevent unnecessary conflict down the line.
So that's just, you would know this is music to my ears, that we would have a conversation about how we're going to have conversations. And as you say, calling it contracting, and just when we use the word contracting, or when I use the word contracting, I'm not talking about the obvious stuff like the employment contract or the stuff that would rely on legal backup. I'm talking about all the unspoken ways in which we create a course of dealing that we weren't even aware of, and that, as you say, you can design all that out. Because what was coming up for me as I was listening to you, and something that I talk about, is when people gather for some kind of purpose or goal, and mostly in workplaces or businesses, but I see this in prisons and schools and all sorts of places. If these conversations haven't taken place and we're all kind of wary and we're worried about what's at stake, or am I going to get in trouble or whatever, then what happens is we actually recreate school. We recreate all the triggers and all the things. So then suddenly, instead of you being a reasonable line manager who just wants some things done that we can have a conversation about, I'm putting on you all the stuff that happened to me when I heard you say that a person, may from time to time be told that the work's crap. Look, you've done it, you've put the time in, but it's crap. It happens. Do you know what I mean? But for someone, that may be taking them back to all those red crosses and the 1 out of 10 and the see me that was written all over their homework, and all the shame and humiliation of that. So I love hearing that. And also the other side of that coin is, when we work with people, it's messy. So we try to create systems and processes so that we don't have the mess, but it is messy. And the idea that we can't say it's going to go wrong from time to time, so we set these expectations that can never be met, it's bound to create, it's unsustainable. So I'd love you to speak to some of that, in the way that you work and how you introduce people to these ideas and take them through the pain points.
First of all, is that the same external phenomena can have two very different experiences for two different people, or there can be almost as many experiences as there are people. So we need to be careful about assuming that our way of perceiving something is going to be the same as someone else's, and therefore we should try and uncover that in order to, first of all, uncover our own. What is my perspective and what is a fact? So that I'm not bringing my stuff unnecessarily to somebody else. And similarly, be mindful of what somebody else's perspective would be. And we want to have conversations about that, because otherwise we're going to make assumptions, and it's a trite phrase, but to assume does often make an ass out of you and me. But there's that, and I'll give you an example. Like, let's say I am working on a particular project with somebody else, and I've joined the project later, and that other person feels that they've got more ownership of it. They were there from the start. I might be making assumptions about that person when I join. Oh, they don't want to work with me because they think it's theirs and they want to take the credit. But I don't know. Maybe they're thinking that, but maybe they're not. And even if they are thinking that, maybe there's a way to work together. And so, having conversations to unveil it, like, what are you actually thinking about this? Let's say, for example, I notice we're working on a project, you and me, Maria, and I notice that there are certain emails you haven't CC'd me on, which would be useful for me to have, because there's information in them that would be useful for me to do my job well. I noticed that. Now, the story I tell myself straight away might be, she's being manipulative, she's trying to exclude me, she wants to take the credit, but I don't know. So a way to deal with that instead would be to surface it in a really simple way, as neutrally as you can, with an observation and an inquiry. So I might go, hey, Maria, I've noticed that you haven't been CCing me on these emails. I wonder what's your reasoning for that? Because I would feel that it would be useful for me to have that information. What's happening there? And come at it from a spirit of curiosity to unveil these things. Whereas if you just leave it unsaid, and also are attached to your perspective, then that tends to build and lead to conflict points, and actually things that don't need to be that can be small can become very big. So that's one element. I think the other element is that what you talk about people's experience at school, that there are two elements to that. Is that as an individual, one of the things I help people do as a coach is help people get into the place of taking responsibility, to accept, like, okay, this is what I am responsible for. Like, and this stuff is me, it's mine, it's not anybody else's. And similarly, in my training work, I help people be more skillful in the way that they deliver messages, so that they are less likely to trigger past experiences. So an example of, a thing that might cause feedback, if I go, must try, like, you haven't tried hard enough on this, that might really trigger somebody from school when they had in red letters, must try harder, on their page. But if I give the context, like, I try to be as specific and depersonalized as I can in the feedback I give, it's less likely to give that. So I'll give you an example. Bill, Sarah, Imran, that piece of work that you gave me, it did not cover these 3 points that need to be covered for it to be thorough. So I'd love in future for you to make sure in this kind of work you're including those, because that will make it thorough and better piece of work. And so there's the being skilled in the giver of feedback to somebody, and there's also being skilled as the taker, developing your own sense of responsibility, developing a sense of, and also the other thing is, and this is something I said to somebody recently, like, somebody can give you the shittest feedback in the world and you can still find something useful in it if you have the right perspective. Like, and I think you would say that this is data, I think would be the words that you might use. Like, to say, I'm going to treat this as information and I'm going to find helpful meaning in it. So somebody could say to me, James, you're shit at that. And I go, that's not very pleasant to hear. But on one level, well, what are they really telling me? On one level, they're telling me that their experience of me in that moment didn't help them or wasn't helpful to them, or okay, so what could I do to change their experience? And maybe I'll realize there's nothing, and the lesson is just that I have to accept that some people won't like what I do. But there also might be another lesson if I bring the perspective of trying to find, um, the phrase I'm using a lot at the moment is like, what's the gift? Like, even in really unhelpful feedback, there could be a gift. So I've spoken in a few different directions there, but I don't know if that's how that's landing or if that makes sense.
Oh, it's perfect. It's music to my ears. I like what I'm, taking from this is that there's something about, if I'm the person that's initiating something, I'm initiating a communication, then there's a lot I can do to create the conditions in which I can get the best possible response. So there's a lot I
Yeah.
can do, and that distinction of the example you gave, in that distinction of I could turn around and say, you've made a mess of this, or it's no good, or you should copy me into these emails. There's a difference between telling someone, like overpowering them, or instructing. Doesn't matter where you are in the hierarchy, right?
Mm,
And being curious. That's
mm.
the distinction I hear you make, is start from curiosity, because you don't know what someone's thinking is.
Yeah, it's you just don't know, and it's so easy to make assumptions all the time. We do it all the time, and it's part of being human. And I think the brain does it for complex evolutionary biological reasons, and so sometimes it may be helpful, but often it's not.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's taking me in a slightly different direction, but I'd like to follow that. In my
Yeah.
understanding, once upon a time when we were hunter gatherers, when you were in the jungle, when you heard the rustling of the leaves, you needed to make a decision. Is this dangerous, or is this just the
Yeah.
wind? And the issue for me is when we start taking that kind of thinking into our interactions with humans, then we're constantly asking ourselves if the person in front of me is dangerous. We don't know
Yes.
that we're doing that consciously, but the way that we're communicating gives that, comes from that place. Is that?
So that's exactly right, and it's. I mean, like if we were, you know, a millennia ago, there's a real benefit to that. Like, because I might get eaten by something, or I might be left alone by my tribe in the wilderness, and I'm going to die. But actually, if somebody has written an email that I don't like the tone of, well, I'm not going to die. I'm just not. And therefore, we need to be very careful about going into an unconscious pattern of creating a narrative which is all about protecting ourselves and not about getting the best result. But we can't, if we think about like a percentage of people, there's probably 10%. This is not empirical, but it's like just as a rule of thumb, probably like 10% of people who are always going to be amazing to us. And there's probably 10% of people who are always going to be really shitty with us that we can't really do much about. So we're really talking about working with the 80 in the middle, and how do we get them up the gradient to our interactions or outcomes with them being as good as they can be. Because okay, if somebody is just deeply wounded at from things that have happened before, and they're just not capable yet of having pleasant, helpful, constructive interactions, well, I only have so much control. But there's loads. Most people are not like that. And actually, this is another thing I would say, like the popularization, or without sophisticated understanding of certain types of therapy speak, can lead to labeling, which is really unhelpful and gets in the way of positive interactions. So like a common one you see on the internet now is like narcissist. So like everybody gets labeled a narcissist. Oh, my ex is a narcissist. Well, were they a narcissist, or were they just a bit selfish sometimes? And so being careful about labels and thinking about, how do I think about people? How do I think about interactions that give us the best opportunity for being constructive rather than destructive?
and that actually
Mm,
we're in a state. We start every day in a state. And of course, if you take that into your workplace, so some of what
mm,
I'm kind of, deducing from the work that you're doing actually could be described as helping people to calm down enough to see the world from, not a sense of panic, but to be able to observe and witness what's going on before taking an action or reacting. Is that a useful way of kind of giving it back to you?
Absolutely, that's absolutely right. I think I would tend to use a slightly different language about it, but I think it's the same thing. So I'll just say the language. So I think often what I would say is that in coaching, I generally say that people come either from their fears or their values. And what I would say my coaching work does is help people calm down enough or disidentify with their fears enough so that they can come from their values rather than their fears. So, um, but I think it's the same thing, just with a slightly different language. So, for example, and maybe I'll give you an example of where I failed. So, or I fail every day. I, I, I,
God,
I
is this going to
know.
become a game of truth or dare?
No, 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 no. It's just a simple example, but like I know that I fail every day when I'm driving because if somebody cuts me off or something, I come from a place of fear and then it leads to anger, and I go, all sort of expletives that I can't say on a podcast. Um, and but actually, my values, my deepest value, I call humanity, which is belief in and care for other people and their capacity. And if I'm really thinking about other people when somebody cuts me off in traffic from that, I'm actually thinking maybe they didn't see me, or hey, they're probably doing their best. Some people find driving hard. Like maybe they're in a hurry. Maybe it's nothing to do with me. It's actually they're not thinking about me at all. Um, and so if I'm able to come from my values, a whole different set of possibilities comes out. I think also that is particularly the case in in workplaces where I'll give you one example where people might come from fear rather than values in the private equity setting. So um, there's a thing called an investment committee, which is the kind of decision making vehicle in many private equity firms, and people approach that with a lot of fear. Often they're thinking, God, if I get this wrong, and I don't get it right, I'll never make partner. My ambitions in this career will never happen. And actually, it's very difficult to perform well if you're coming from that place of fear. But actually, if you're coming from a place of your values, and often people in private equity, obviously humans have many different value sets, but they often have values around curiosity and impact and um, excellence. And if they come at it from there, like, actually, I just want to be really, really well prepared because I love being really well prepared. It's a totally different mindset. It's a and it's a totally different experience. And then just to bring it back to conflict, that same thing can happen with people. So um, I have a deep value of kind of community or connection. And if I come to people from there, the possibility of that happening is so much higher than if I'm like afraid that, oh, this relationship's going to be messed up. People do it in romantic relationships as well. I mean, I know I don't want to go there because it's not really where I coach, but people definitely do it there as well. Um, and I think, I remember I've working at the very top level. It's funny. You might think this is a thing that people kind of naturally grow out of, but they don't, because you have to be very deliberate about this, in my experience, because the things that get you to the top of a lot of industries have nothing to do with the things that make you really good at working with other people. So I'll give you an example. In private equity, the things that make you get to kind of investment director level, which is the kind of levels before partner, sometimes it's called principal. They're about being a really detailed analyst of a business and really having insight into the figures, the data, the market, to make good decisions about it. And that's a great skill in that industry, and you probably can't get to the partner level without it. But when you become a partner, You have to be really good at convincing people to trust you. You have to be really good at managing and getting the best out of people below you. And you have to be really good at working with your other partners because, hey, you all have a financial stake in this thing succeeding. By definition, you've paid some money. So we've got to get on together for this whole company to work. And those skills are different. And so you need to develop them, and you need to be active in or just being deliberate about them. And I would say coming from a values place rather than a fears place. And it takes time, but it's very possible.
So yeah, I kind of get that, and then for me, you know, riffing off of that is you come from a values place, and then that affects the way you use language because most people are just improvising in having conversations, and there is a skill and a mastery to the use of language and how we use it. So yeah, this has been really great, and we could talk for hours. But I'm going to wrap this up. Time's coming to an end, and I'm going to ask you
Yes.
for. So I've listened to this. I'm a listener, and I've just listened to this conversation, and it's kind of made me think of all sorts of different things. And then I've gone, you know what? I've just got to get up and go to work tomorrow. What's one thing somebody could tell themselves? They get up in the morning, they're going, got to do this day. I've got to pay the mortgage. Whatever,
Brilliant.
whatever the motivation is for going to work. What's one thing a person could tell themselves?
Can I offer two? They're both very simple.
Yeah. Well, yeah, two for the price of one, eh?
So the first thing is when I am working with another person, I'm going to take, and I'm curious about them, I'm going to take the word why out of my vocabulary. So instead of asking why did they do that, because that tends to communicate judgment, ask what happened, like what was happening, and that the quality of your conversations will radically alter if you get rid of why from your vocabulary when you're talking with people. And then the second thing is to get deliberately into the process of acknowledging what are the facts and what am I thinking or perceiving about the facts. Because that awareness is the first step to changing them. So when you get up in the morning, you get an email. Let's just say, just to give one example, you get an email, and straight away you're triggered, and you think, "Oh God, this person's making judgment." Just take a moment, then. Okay, what are the facts that are here, and how am I perceiving them? So if you do those two things, one, get rid of the word why from your vocabulary when you're talking with people, because it tends to communicate judgment and that gets in the way. And two, get in the habit of practicing what are the facts, what's my perspective on the facts, because once you've done that, you can begin to alter it and find more helpful perspectives. They are the two frontline things that I think can make a really big difference to the way that we interact with the world.
I love that. I hope that our listeners have, found some little nuggets in there, and that they can actually sort of implement straight away or reflect on. And James, if somebody wanted to find you, or what are you doing now, or where, how can we get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can find me at my website, www.jameselliscoaching.com, or you can email me at james@jameselliscoaching.com. And the main bits of work that I do are one-to-one coaching, so people who want to develop themselves in various ways, group coaching, so coaching a team to improve basically relational dynamics and performance in the team, and then training around developing coaching cultures, which includes at its core being really great at listening, really great at questioning, really great at delivering feedback. So they're the kind of three main bodies of my work. I work primarily with private equity companies and schools, but actually that's just how it's shaken out. This work can apply in all kinds of different contexts. So james@jameselliscoaching.com or www.jameselliscoaching.com, one-to-one coaching, group coaching, or training to develop coaching cultures and improve the way you interact in an organization.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks, James. I've really enjoyed this. Talking to you is always a great experience. Thank you.
Maria, thank you so much for having me on the show.